Hi, welcome. Welcome to our full 2016 McMillan-Stewart biennial lecture. I'm Lerna Ekmekçioğlu. I'm the McMillan-Stewart Chair in Women in the Developing World, based in history, and I'm affiliated with the Women and Gender Studies program as well. We are very lucky to have Miriam Cooke with us today. I'll introduce her, try to keep it as short as possible, and then Professor Cooke will talk for about 40 minutes, and then we'll have half an hour of discussion time. We'll try to end at around 6:30. Miriam Cooke is Braxton Craven Professor of Arab Cultures at Duke University. She has been a visiting professor in Tunisia, Romania, Indonesia, Qatar, and Alliance of Civilizations Institute in Istanbul. Her writings have focused on the intersection of gender and war in modern Arabic literature and on Arab women writers' construction of Islamic feminism. Her more recent interests have turned to Arab cultural studies with a concentration on Syria and to the networked connections among Arabs and Muslims around the world. Professor Cooke is quite literally one of the giants in our field of Middle Eastern studies, broadly speaking, and Middle East women's studies particularly. She has, since 1980s, early 80s, she has been a prolific author. She has many monographs and now several edited volumes. I've debated if I should read all of them or not, but I decided that I will read them and maybe give the year, not the publication, but because it will give you the universe in which this scholar, whom we are very honored to have here tonight, operated in the last 30, 35 years. So it started with this book called The Anatomy of an Egyptian Intellectual, Yahya Hakki, which she published in 1984, out of the dissertation, I assume, and it was on a man. She changes after this, and she remains changed up until today, more or less. The second one is Wars, Other Voices, Women Writers on the Lebanese Civil War. Then another book, Women and the War Story, 1997, which is one of my favorites. I teach Women and War here. I saw some of my students. We did cover this book, some chapters of this book this morning, and Professor Cooke was kind enough to visit visit my course, and it facilitated great discussion. So thank you for that as well. Then Women Claim Islam, Creating Islamic Feminism Through Literature, 2001. Then Dissident Syria, Making Oppositional Arts Official, 2007. She has an interest in arts representation and media. Then also biographies, a book called Nazira Zeyneddin, A Pioneer of Islamic Feminism, which came out in 2010. Then another book titled Tribal Modern, Branding New Nations in the Arab Gulf, which came out in 2014. And her latest book dealing with the art of the Syrian Revolution from 2011-2016 is entitled Dancing in Damascus, Creativity, Resilience, and the Syrian Revolution, which will appear in the next 2 weeks. In terms of edited volumes, the first one is called Opening the Gates, A Century of Arab Feminist Writing, which is a book that I've also used in my teaching. Very, very valuable, trailblazing work. Gendering War Talk, 1993. Muslim Networks from Hajj to Hip Hop, 2005. And Mediterranean Passages from Dido to Dirda, in 2008. Last but not least, she also has published a novel called Hayati, My Life, which came out in 2002. Please help me welcome Professor Cooke.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Lena, for that kind introduction. So yes, today the topic is a bit tough, but it's also a topic that is as current today as it was in the 8th century before the Common Era. In fact, rape has been part of war for almost 3 millennia, probably more. So intertwined have war and rape been that violating the enemy's women, probably also their men, and this is something that is going to be very much part of my talk today, and I think this is something that is new to a lot of people, the idea that men are raped. So intertwined have war and rape been that violating the enemy's men and women has millennially been so beyond question that it could be celebrated in art and literature. In this talk, I argue that the late 20th century marked a rupture in the traditional understanding of the rules of combat. In other words, men protectors at the front and women defended at home. With the ungendering of the war space, the acceptance of rape as a weapon of war is today being contested more and more. Two classical events were particularly inspiring. Well, our story begins in 750 before the Common Era, when Romulus founded Rome. All was well until he realized that his new city had too few women, and he feared that his splendid victory would fizzle without them. To solve the problem, he ordered his men to take women from the enemy's Sabine tribe. Many men, including the Latin poet Ovid, celebrated the rape of the Sabine women. And in one of his poems, he writes, "Grant me such wage, the rape, and I'll enlist today." And then, of course, there are the Renaissance artists like the 17th century Nicolas Poussin and the Italian Sebastiano Ricci. And they have portrayed their fantasy of what that violation of beautiful women must have been. And note the emphasis on beauty of the women. Another glamorous rape, and forgive my being sarcastic about this, another glamorous rape scene comes from the Trojan Wars, when the Greek archer Ajax the Less raped the doomed Trojan prophet Cassandra. Nobody stopped him. Clearly, his deed was not considered blameworthy. So here we see it on a Greek pot. And then we have also here the British portraitist, Solomon J. Solomon, who heightens the tension that we saw in the other images through his stark racialization of the couple. So why has rape been so glamorized? Rape in war is, in fact, or it was, as glamorous as war itself, when it is spectacularized as heroic performance of virility. It confirms victory over a feckless, feminized enemy who's not been able to protect what is most valuable. The enemy woman, beautiful and vulnerable, belongs to us. Her children by us are ours. His lovely Helen on our arm makes a mockery of his virility. So I will very briefly sketch the history that Susan Brown Miller in 1975 produced for us in her Against Our Will, Men, Women, and Rape. And she traces the history of rape in war from biblical times to the late 20th century, or to 1975 when she was actually writing. Her painstaking research reveals that despite penalties, and there were severe penalties on the books, however rarely enforced, rape in war has been a millennial constant. In the 20th century, the pace of this constant accelerated. And with the transformation in information technology, our knowledge of these sexual crimes has increased exponentially. So during World War I, when the Germans invaded Belgium in August of 1914, Brown-Miller notes, and I quote, "Rape was suddenly catapulted into prominence as the international metaphor of Belgian humiliation as a result of the evolution of a new form of battle, the scientific use of propaganda," end of quote. Rape in war shamed the enemy, in this case, of course, Belgium, and confirmed the heroic and masculinizing nature of sexual violence. Convictions, if any, were minor. Rape during World War II, especially in Nazi Germany, China, the rape of Nanking, and in Korea, was as widespread and as silenced at the time. Germans and Japanese have been censored for their enslavement of enemy women, and of course, Korean comfort women are still waiting for their apology from the Japanese. And it's important also to note, I don't deal with it so much here, but that the silencing of these kinds of crimes, they weren't yet called war crime, rape was not called a war crime yet, that silence began to be broken in the 1990s. American soldiers have also been sexually violent. Although they knew, and I quote from Brown-Miller, "rape is a capital offense under military jurisprudence," some of the US military men liberating Europe from the Nazi scourge were not deterred. From January 1942 until June 1945, 273 men were tried and received US court-martial convictions. Between 65 and 73, in our next war, Vietnam, American men fighting in Vietnam are reported to have sexually assaulted many Vietnamese, even if only 86 were tried and only 50 were convicted. The figures that Brown-Miller provides for US rapes of Vietnamese were, and she tells us, very difficult to attain, as silence about this period still prevails. It did in 75, it still does today. Another example, during the 1971 war between Pakistan and what came to be called Bangladesh, girls as young as 8 and grandmothers as old as 75 were raped, and the numbers, in large numbers, and the figures that Brown-Miller gives is between 200 and 400,000. She calls the story of Bangladesh unique because it was the first time that rape of women in war had received serious international attention. So concern about rape in conflict kept growing until the early 1990s, when Rwandan Hutu and Serb camps holding Tutsi and Bosnian women in sexual slavery were discovered and globally denounced, described in gruesome detail. News of other rape camps in Libya, South Sudan, Nigeria, Kosovo, and Congo, known as the rape capital of the world, followed. The new twist in the rape in war story was a systematization and the authorization of rape as an official tactic that various departments of defense advocated and that new media broadcast around the world. In February 2001, during the Bosnian Foka rape case, the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, and I'm going to refer to it from now on as the ICTY, in The Hague, finally decreed that when rape and sexual enslavement are widespread and systematic, I'm using their words, not simply an individual action, but involve a chain of command, it constituted a crime against humanity. Importantly, during a campaign of ethnic cleansing, it was not necessary to establish a linked chain of command. And this is important because that, and I was pretty much involved in some of this during the early years of the 90s with the crisis with Bosnian women being raped, that it was the chain of command did not have to be linked, because that is very, very hard to do. But it was enough for a commander to know that his men were raping for this to constitute, and not to do anything about it, for it to constitute a crime against humanity. So feminists who had been working towards this goal of criminalizing rape and war at the highest level and raising international consciousness believed this decision heralded a new era. They hoped that women would no longer be considered legitimate targets whose violation would help to soften the enemy and win the war. Were we wrong? Did the decision herald a historical legal landmark, or was it just another empty threat? The jury, I feel, is still out. Some of the most disappointing instances of the continued strategic use of rape in conflict have come from the 2011 revolutions that we know as the Arab Spring, and particularly from Egypt, Tunisia, and Syria. In each case, men and women had initially worked together during the demonstrations to create a united front, and many women had played prominent roles. So in this image, you see Ala Awad, he's a graffiti artist from Luxor, hence you can tell the pharaonic influence on the way in which he painted. This is a wall that he painted in the, is it Muhammad Street, where a lot of the graffiti artists were working. So this is just one example, but there were many, many examples of women's important role in the demonstrations being celebrated. In Syria, Najwa Sahlul describes what women did when the Bashar Assad regime tried to block demonstrations in Damascus. They installed loudspeakers on the tops of buildings and in parks. They broadcast revolutionary songs and released balloons with tracts urging the people to join the demonstrations. They tagged walls in honor of the revolution, the prisoners, and the disappeared. There are thousands of amateur videos on YouTube that show women at home with their faces covered so as not to be identified, reading out declarations and slogans. For their contributions, many were stigmatized. This is not specific to Syria, but elsewhere also. And several women were gang raped in front of their fathers, husbands, and children. These intimidations broke the spirits of the strongest and forced many to escape. In refugee camps, the healing process had to begin, with activists helping women to speak and to talk about their ordeals. They wanted to assure these women that, in fact, the only shame was to have endured that vile regime all these years. And I take this from Najwa Sahlul's statement. So the backlash in the Arab Spring countries has been fierce. Men and women protesters have become sexual prey very often. New governments, overwhelmingly Islamist, crack down on women's public presence. In Tunisia, considered to be the most progressive and women-friendly of all the Arab Spring countries, women protesters were reported to have been raped. Faiza Skandrani, the head of the Tunisian Equality and Parity Organization, told Jazeera, "The revolution was about freedom and democracy, not about undermining women's rights. They want to build a society where women can be used and treated like objects." And of course, this was talking particularly about the period after the revolution when the Islamist Nahda party came into power. Government thugs and gangs on the prowl everywhere have been turning streets and squares into forbidding zones of sexual violence. In response to this pervasive sexual violence, Arab women and men have been organizing to prevent further violence and to assert greater respect for women and their rights. Egyptians have been the most visibly active. Founded in 2010, Harassmap is an organization dedicated to the elimination of sexual harassment and assault in Egypt. Refusing to be cowed, Egyptian activists have developed an app. In the class earlier today, somebody was asking about the role of social media. And of course, we've heard so much about the role of social media in mobilizing the activists, but social media has provided many, many other services. So they developed an app that allows them to crowdsource and to anonymously report incidents of sexual harassment in Egypt's public spaces by texting a hotline through their social media accounts onto the site. Another group is Operation Op Anti-SH is Operation Anti-Sexual Harassment. It was established in November 2012, and its motto was control your sons, not your daughters. Note the English. For those of you who were following any of the coverage or the videos that came out of the Arab Spring countries, you will have noticed that many of the banners, particularly the banners, but also videos, have a lot of English in them. So you have a really good sense of who it is that they're targeting in their message. So Operation Anti-Sexual Harassment had learned that it was not enough to stop attacks in medias res. They had to intervene before, during, and after the attacks. When a major protest is planned, Op Anti-SH volunteers go to Tahrir Square, the downtown square in Cairo where the revolution started on January the 25th, 2011. So the volunteers go to Tahrir, and I'm quoting Vicky Langor when she describes what they do. They distribute cards with hotline numbers and flyers advising people what to do if they see an assault. Volunteers wear white T-shirts that say in red, "Against harassment," on the front, and "A square safe for all" on the back. Another team waits in apartments close to Tahrir with first aid items, clothing, and shoes for the survivors who've often been stripped during their assaults. And here again, I have to emphasize that it isn't just women who are being attacked, but men also. So in 2012, also, another group was established. They're called Women on Walls, WOW, and it's a women's graffiti art collective, and they've joined the war against rape as a weapon of war in Egypt. They're powerful images of women, and here, of course, we see her spraying the potential attackers as though they were insects or mice. In a February 2014 YouTube, some young WOW women explained their symbols and motivations to Mia Gröndal, the Swedish photographer who has photo archived to Tahrir graffiti. Some amazing work that I would really recommend to you. Many painted eyes. Women's eyes, one of the artists explained, are looking at the men. The idea is that men should feel that they're being watched. There are many, many more images. So men should feel that these eyes, these women's eyes, are looking at them and telling them they have a vision beyond the current harassment. Further, they want the ogling men to know that they're being watched. So there has been, probably back to Romulus, a wall of shame around rape. The difficulty, of course, for women, particularly in conservative cultures where women are emblems of their culture's values and norms, the idea that a member of one's family, a woman, such an important, culturally important element of the family has been raped has been problematic. It's been problematic to talk about it. And it's also problematic here. The openness to talk about rape here is fairly recent. But in these countries that I'm talking about, so primarily Egypt, Tunisia, and Syria, The wall of shame surrounding rape that had formerly silenced women is beginning to crumble. Survivors' televised stories of assault have challenged the belief that being assaulted is a source of shame. There's another crucially important reason for this new forthrightness, and it's one that Maurice Tadros has written about in a recently published article in the Journal of Middle East Women's Studies, where she argues recognition of men's exposure to politically motivated sexual violence in conflict has been instrumental to breaking the silence on the topic, unquote. The rape of men does not contaminate family honor in the way that women's violation does, since men are not considered vessels of their community's most prized norms and values. Men's denunciations of those who have raped them create a culture of outrage against those who have used sexual violence for power. And these denunciations demand a politics in which freedom and gender justice are paramount. Fear that they might damage the image of their revolutions, and that was another issue. It wasn't just that you were going to somehow be exposing your family to shame, but if you spoke about the revolution that you had believed so deeply in and participated in so importantly, if you then talk about rape, doesn't that damage the revolution? Now, new, even more deadly challenges have surfaced in the form of Islamist terrorism and the authorized deployment of rape as a weapon of war. In its jihad to take over the Muslim oikumene, Islamic State has mobilized women's bodies in multiple alarming ways. In name and in fact, Islamic State has been functioning, hopefully not for much longer, has been functioning as a state with a metropolitan capital in Raqqa, an army, a police force, an intelligence service, a school curriculum where it's forbidden to learn English. They have a national anthem, and they have a national flag. And above all, they have an acknowledged leader, the Caliph Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi al-Qurayshi. The invented moniker al-Qurayshi connects him to the Quraysh, the tribe of the Prophet Muhammad. Declaring themselves a state, they project what Achille Mbembe has defined as the crucial characteristics of the war machine. And I quote from Mbembe, a political unity, a principle of rational organization, the embodiment of the idea of the universal, in this case, of course, the Ummah, and a moral sign. The state has a divine right to exist. This divine right to exist is at the heart of Islamic State propaganda that promises the restoration of the original 7th century Islamic State with its mission to spread Islam across the world. Women are crucial to this mission. Exploiting tribal rhetoric around honor and women's roles in safeguarding it, Islamic State launched an international recruitment campaign with the women of Islamic State, and I will be talking about them shortly, playing significant roles in attracting to its utopia women and lonely girls glued to their social media. We know about them by now. Such women are promised community and protection, but only, of course, if they obey draconian medieval rules. If they disobey, or they live in Islamic State territory but are not Sunni, they are legitimate targets. On the 7th of May 2015, Zeynep Bangura, the UN Special Envoy on Sexual Violence in Conflict, warned that Islamic State had, and I quote, institutionalized sexual violence and the brutalization of women as a central aspect of that ideology and operations, using it as a tactic of terrorism to advance their key strategic objectives. Sexual violence is being committed strategically, she said, in a widespread and systematic manner, and with a high degree of sophistication by most parties to the conflict in Syria and Iraq. So this was a statement that she made in May of 2015, and I wondered how did she know about it? And I'm going to be talking about this in a minute, but I wonder if in fact she had had access to what has been called the Rape Handbook. This Rape Handbook was discovered during a raid on an Islamic State center in December of 2015. This handbook, called Fatwa 64, that I will talk about, lists 15 rules governing the appropriate way to rape. On the 29th and 30th of December 2015, the Daily British The Mirror, the Clarion Project, Reuters, the Huffington Post, and various other media outlets reported that Islamic State theologians, and they use the term theologians, have published what reads like a Sharia-compliant rape handbook. Sound crazy? Regulating the rape of women captives. So why such concern to provide rape rules? In August 2014, as many of you, I'm sure, also heard, Islamic State men had gone wild after capturing 5,000 Yazidi women and children from Sinjar. So the Yazidis, an ancient community between 300 and 700,000 in North Iraq, Sinjar, considered by many heterodox, Islamic State actually calls them devil worshippers. They have been, I guess, in some ways sort of like the Jews of the region, pogroms that had targeted them again and again. And so this is the community that Islamic State attacked, killing the 3,000 men and abducting 5,000 women. And they boasted of their heroism as follows. And I take this quotation from their own journal. Their journal is, or newspaper, is called Dabiq. Anyone heard of Dabiq? So what is it? No.
It's a magazine where they publish the articles.
No, but the name is the name of a town. And in a way, it's, they were doing with Dabiq what Saddam Hussein did with Qadisiyah. So he declared his victory over the Iranians in what he called his Qadisiyah, going back to the early victory, the victory of the earliest Muslims over the Persians. And so Islamic State did the same with Dabiq. Now, Dabiq is a town, and they were planning for this to be their great victory. Well, on Sunday, 3 days ago, they lost it. So they're going to have to rename their journal, I guess. But in their journal, Dabiq, they write, after capture, the Yazidi women and children were then divided according to the Sharia, always according to the Sharia, and you'll hear some of the Sharia language in a minute. Among the fighters who participated in the Sinjar operations, after 1/5 of the captives were transferred to the Islamic State's authority to be divided as khums, so 1/5. So note the association of rape and war in the single Arabic term meaning 1/5, khums. Alarmingly, rape was more than part of an attempt to ethnically cleanse the Yazidi community. It actually turned into a religious duty. Islamic State men are reported to pray before and after each rape. A Yazidi woman interviewed for the New York Times in August of 2015 quotes a man who raped her as saying, he kept telling me this is ibadah, this is worship. He said that raping me is his prayer to God. And another woman said that rape is bringing this man closer to God. On January the 29th of 2015, theologians, to use that term, theologians of the Islamic State's Committee of Research and Fatwas issued Fatwa 64, regulating rape of female captives, because, and here is a totally illegible, I guess you can read it a bit, is a translation, an early translation of it into English. Though I'm not sure, maybe it was actually also at the time written in English, because so many of their fighters have been recruited from outside the Arab world. So I need to check on that. And it says at the top, hard to read, that they had to issue this fatwa because some of the brothers have committed violations not permitted by Sharia law. So since they haven't raped according to Sharia law, well then, this is what they're... I hope it's clear I'm being ironic, that this is not Sharia law. I was suddenly worried. So using Quranic language about injunctions toward kindness from Surah An-Nisa, so the fourth chapter of the Quran is called the chapter of women, and it's full of injunctions to men to be kind to women and children. Fatwa 64, and I'm going to list some of these 15 articles, insists that the owner of a female captive should, I quote, show compassion towards her, be kind to her, not humiliate her, and not assign her work she is unable to perform. He should not sell her to an individual who he knows will treat her badly or do unto her what Allah has forbidden. If he releases her, quote, he's not permitted to have intercourse with her afterwards because she's become free and is no longer his property. A father can no longer rape his woman captive after he's given or sold her to his son. Cleanliness and paternity matter. The owner of a female captive cannot rape her until the end of her menstrual cycle. Nor can he rape her if she's pregnant. And if pregnant, he should not force her to abort. As for anal sex, it's absolutely out. So I will dwell briefly on 3 articles of Fatwa 64 to highlight the disturbing echo of verses 23 to 24 of Surah An-Nisa that list the women that men cannot marry. And I will come to that in a minute. So, if the owner of a female captive who has a daughter suitable for intercourse has sexual relations with the latter, he's not permitted to have intercourse with her mother, and she's permanently off limits to him. Should he have intercourse with her mother, then he's not permitted to have intercourse with her daughter, and she is to be off limits to him. Now, just remember this language because you'll be hearing the same kind of use of words to the opposite effect. If the female captive is owned by a father, his son cannot have intercourse with her, and vice versa. Moreover, intercourse with his wife's female captive is also not permissible. So, the language in which Fatwa 64 is couched is reminiscent of a number of verses, but I was just going to read these to you. So, forbidden to you, right? This is the language of the fatwa. Forbidden to you are your mothers, your daughters, your sisters, your paternal aunts, your maternal aunts, brothers' daughters, sisters' daughters, mothers that have suckled you, your foster sisters, on and on and on. Right? Then, and forbidden to you are all married women except those whom your right hand possesses. This is Allah's ordinance to you, and lawful for you are all women besides those. So these are mahram laws. Mahram is from haram, harim, forbidden, and a woman's mahram, I know many of you know this here, but some may not. A mahram will be a man who either is married to the woman or who cannot be married to the woman. So one of the people you know who's the mother of your wives and whatever. So there is here an injunction about sisters, and in connection with this one, and it says the wives of your sons who are of your own loins, and that you should have two sisters together, except what has already passed. So in connection with that prohibition, Fatwa 64 forbids the owner of two sisters from raping both. So if you've raped one, you can't rape the other. But if you actually do rape the second one, then you can't go back to the first one. So as you see in 24, all married women, except those that I read, provided that you seek them with your property, taking them in marriage, not committing fornication. Sex outside marriage is fornication, it's a crime against God, and it is punishable with stoning, lashing. So Islamic men's familiarity with Quranic language and the conduct it codifies would make 64 not only reasonable, but perhaps also religiously valid. Yazidi women are not the only ones who have been victimized. Even Islamic State women are terrorized into unquestioning obedience, unable to leave their homes unless fully covered. Here you see them shopping. According to Karen Koning Abu Zaid, failure to abide by these rules is punishable by lashing. Punishments may be carried out by the Al-Hasba morality police, but increasingly, they are the responsibility of the all-female brigade, Al-Khansa, which assists in monitoring adherence to dress codes and enforcing punishments. Khansa was a very famous woman poet from the pre-Islamic and early Islamic period. She was a judge of the poetry competitions that used to take place in Mecca. So in January 2015, the Khansa Brigade, and this is a picture of them, issued a manifesto that they called Women in the Islamic State. So it too has a number of articles. But the one that is concerning is that they condone marriage with girls who are as young as 9 years old. So they may, in fact, be doing nothing more than obeying the Saudi preacher and teacher at King Saud University, Shaikh Dr. Muhammad al-Arifi, who issued a fatwa, notice lots of fatwas, on the 24th of August 2014, allowing sexual jihad, marriage with Syrian girls and women for a few hours, but without payment. So for a few hours with payment would be a mut'a or a siyar, but here's without payment. According to his Wikipedia page, and I do encourage you to go to it, the 46-year-old Al-Arifi has over 16 million likes on Facebook and over 8 million followers on Twitter, which places his account in the top 100 worldwide and number one for the Middle East. And this is a citation from his own Wikipedia site. So this man obviously is dangerous. Syrian art photographer Khalid Akil's, I should have put Khalid Akil's name up there, Khalid Akil. This is an art photographer from Aleppo who has been in Istanbul for the past 3 years. And he put together an exhibition called A Woman Between, where the entire exhibition is devoted to the abuse of the Yazidi women in the summer of 2014. And here what he's done, and he does this quite a lot, he'll pose a nude in a classical pose. And all of these little kind of Warhol squares around her, that's Al-Arifi, let me see. No. So that's this guy in many. And when I spoke with him and asked him about this art, he says that he's trying to fight this violence with art. Of course, art is important in this war against Islamic State rape, but there must be more done. So far from advancing after the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia 15 years ago declared rape in war to be a war crime, a crime against humanity, we seem to have regressed. New religious authorities, including women, are enabling this crime. And there is a group that was established in 2012, the International Campaign to Stop Rape and Gender Violence in Conflict, who are monitoring the incidents of rape and war around the world, and they're campaigning for its ending. The statistics are alarming. Working with the international campaign are Physicians for Human Rights, Nobel laureates, international advocacy organizations and groups working at the regional and community levels. They're all working together to in this campaign. Yes, so obviously what they're hoping for is to create a world without war, rape, and gender violence. So I know that I've been ending on a very negative note, but I think it's important for us to think about the ways in which particularly groups that project themselves as being Islamic are going deliberately against Sharia and Islam. So are things actually worse? And I'm still trying to make up my mind about this, but I think the fact that we are so aware of the pervasiveness of rape as a weapon of war because of social media, because of information technology, I think that this is an important fact. Although men in all parts of the world at war have not been dissuaded from sexually attacking women and men, their actions are now more likely to be publicized, represented, and prosecuted. Above all, survivors are no longer necessarily shamed into silence. This new awareness is crucial. Breaking the silence matters. Breaking the silence, I think, is the central weapon in our war against rape as a weapon of war. Thank you. Sure, I'd be happy to answer questions. Yeah.
Thank you for your presentation. I wanted to ask, how would this campaign to stop rape and gender violence and conflict interact with more recent efforts and exposés like the Invisible War and talking about sexual violence within the ranks of military efforts? I know a lot of your focus is on the Middle East and sort of the third world, and you did mention some of it that Americans also perpetrated, but could you talk about how this campaign or these efforts in the international community would also affect some of the more domestic parts of this?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think, can I move? It's better if I stay. Okay. I think this kind of violence has always been in the military. Women in America are much newer to the military. So I think that it's sort of like when you talk about crime and you say, oh my goodness, there's much more crime. Well, it could be that there's much more coverage of crime. So I don't think that there is more rape now. I think that there's much more awareness. And I think that it is this awareness and these campaigns and collaborations between various different groups that are going to make a difference. And because these rapes are being reported, and there's the whole question in the American military, of course, who am I going to report to? Because the person I'm supposed to report to is the one who's just raped me. So we're becoming aware of that. And I think there is an attempt. I don't think it's robust enough yet, but I think there is an attempt to find ways to make the reporting of rape safe, or at least safer. So this is all pretty new, and particularly in the Arab world, the whole question of rape has been so difficult. In fact, there was a Moroccan woman who 2 or 3 years ago, I think her name was Amina Filali, who had been raped, and she talked about her rape, and so the rapist was taken to court, and the court allowed him to go scot-free if he agreed to marry her, which he did, and she committed suicide. So that's another, a terrible way, but another way in which people are beginning to understand the extent to which rape is as lethal as murder. Yeah.
Thank you for the great presentation. It was really helpful.
Thank you.
I really want to know if there's a way to curb assault of any form. Do you
I'm going to have to come closer.
Okay.
Don't worry about that.
Is there any way which you see that we can curb sexual assault in any form, apart from, we talk about art influencing other people and how it can change mindsets in the society. We're now talking also about social media, where people can talk about rape openly. But rape itself is a very horrible incident in anyone's life, and nobody wants to encounter it. So do you think we have we are at a stage where we should look at interventions which can prevent assault before it happens, rather than talking about it later and looking at trauma centers and different other rehabilitations?
Yeah, well, I think this is okay. Well, I think there we have an interesting example from Egypt, both with harassment, which is identifying places where people who are entering into public space because they want to demonstrate, because they want to be there and they want to call for something, freedom, the ouster of the president, whatever, that there are places that are being monitored, and they're being monitored, as I mentioned, using apps, putting people in the buildings around. this is, of course, rape in university, rape in the military. That's harder because you have to, if you want to do something to stop it before it happens, and you want to do it in the way that they've been doing it with the Operation Anti-Sexual Harassment, you have to know that there is likelihood that a particular space is going to be particularly lethal for people. It's going to make people who enter that space are going to be sexually vulnerable. I think otherwise it's really hard. It's sort of like how do you find a terrorist? You have sleepers, right? And sleeper rapists. I don't know. I think my issue is not so much rape outside war, though. Forgive me, some of the students who heard me this morning when I said rape and peace and war are on a continuum. They are indeed on a continuum, but there is something that happens when lethal violence breaks out. And so it is in those spaces that I think one can be more proactive.
Right.
Otherwise, it's, I don't know, we have to take care of each other, right? So I'll go back. Yeah.
Thank you for your presentation. And I also want to thank you for your mention about the miserable story of women in 19 during the Japanese invasion in 1930s.
Nanjing.
Yeah, because I'm from China.
Yeah.
And I have two questions. The first question is about I was wondering why Egypt takes so active participation during the campaign, and is that the main reason is the political revolution you mentioned? That is the first question. And the second question is about the women. In those Islamic states, they may think rape is a way to the God. So.
Islamic State.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. So we're not talking Islamic countries. We're talking about Islamic State.
Yeah. So if there are any measurements or actions we can do to change this women's mind, think about that thing.
So when to change the women's minds, you're talking about the khamsa, the women,
Exactly.
women's participation in violence against women.
Yeah.
No, I think Islamic State is criminal in everything that it does. What I think can be done is hopefully what is happening right now, because within the bubble that they're living in, they have these theologians quote unquote, who are using language that sounds persuasive to these men and women who probably don't know their Quran particularly well. They may not even know it at all, but they can recognize something that sounds Quranic. And then, where here, right? So it says things they've been creating. They have been perpetrating violations not permitted by Sharia law. So then, they're correcting it. So in fact, they're saying this is Sharia law. I don't think that there's anything that can be done other than to deprive them of their state and their lives. No, I didn't say that. Yeah.
Thank you very much for that. I had a question about sort of trying to get the conversation beyond, tying up with yours, beyond the after, what can be done after in terms of the reporting and the use of social media. And I'm coming from this from the perspective of, as a historian of South Asia, where at least since the mid-19th century, and of course sort of much before that, crimes against women in wartime have in fact led to certain social practices in certain communities, which now we would understand as honor killings, but in fact, have been about, in moments of crisis, women committing suicide even to prevent being taken away by communities. So it isn't as much as there's a silence on these. In fact, cultures and communities sort of have come up with different mechanisms to deal. And I wondered if in this sort of region there are, beyond sort of the very contemporary use of social media, other ways in which women can be brought into the conversation that go beyond the public aspect of reporting and community awareness.
Yeah, I'm not sure that, and that goes back to the previous question. I'm not sure what can be done beyond just raising awareness. Shaming men who have been led to believe that that rape is part of war, that the enemy has to be softened. That is the term that's often used. So feminized, totally emasculated through the rape of their women. So I think we have to raise the awareness, and these numbers. Really, where we are now is very much a result of the opening up of the Bosnian camps. I think it was the first time where there was this notion of mass rape. I mean, what is mass rape? Well, we now know that mass rape is like tens of thousands. And this was in Rwanda, and then we started to realize, well, this has been something that has been going on for a long time. So there was an understanding that this was the first time that rape had been so systematized. But then going back to the question about Nanjing, we had the comfort women in Korea, equivalent of comfort women also in China, and then they're just huge numbers, but people weren't talking about it. And I think the fact that we're talking about it now is so new. I mean, if you think that rape in war has only been decreed a war crime. With a war crime, you can be hanged, you can be electrocuted, you can be killed for a war crime. So rape in war is now a war crime. We need to have more prosecutions of people who have committed rape. And we need to have a system where the reporting is possible. So just to go back to the question, the first question, if you've been raped by your commanding officer, you have to go to somebody else. And so there has to be a recognition that there is a pandemic of rape in the American military. In the same way that there is a huge problem with military men coming back and being very violent against women. So when you talk about honor crimes, we call it domestic abuse, and domestic abuse can end up with somebody dead, but it starts with the assumption that marital rape is not a concept, that a man who's coming back from war has rights to his wife, to use her the way he wants to. So there have to be campaigns. I think campaigns have to happen in high schools. It has to be systematic. Yeah.
Very naive question. Are you aware of any measure taken by the Army, maybe the US Army or others, to prevent rape in conflicts that are engaged with?
I don't actually know about that. I think the prevention is so hard. I mean, what can you do? You can say, rape. Okay. I'll volunteer. Yes, actually, I have been asked several times to go down to Fort Bragg, which is very close to Duke, and I have never gone, but maybe I should go. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a combat veteran, a sergeant no less, and I think that the major aspect of preventing any bad behavior or delinquency among soldiers is the disposition of their commanders.
Yeah.
I really think so. I'm familiar with the French Foreign Legion. I'm familiar. I was in Iraq, and I understand. I was at Fort Bragg too. But I understand that is really the major aspect, and it's very hard to train it. It's really just based on a person's disposition as a direct commander of men, and it has to do with certain things like trust and reliability and competence, and these are the things that are really big. Because if your disposition will not allow a soldier to do something wrong, anything, rape or whatever it is, they probably, if they're relying on you, they probably aren't going to do it.
Yeah.
So, I hope you visit Fort Bragg sometime.
Are you still there?
No, that was years ago.
Oh, okay. Okay.
They've got a nice golf course, though.
Pinehurst. Yeah, so maybe there is an answer after all, and maybe it is mass education, and maybe it has to be. I think it has to be before university.
The other thing that I want to mention is they had recently decided that women in the military are going to be put into combat positions.
Right.
And I have always thought, a lot of old timers don't like that idea, but in many countries in Europe and NATO have women in combat positions. And I think
Actually
it's a
in
good idea.
combat? Actually in combat, or just?
Oh, so Israel certainly.
Well, Israel very, very recently allowed very few women in, even though every single Israeli woman has been in the military for 2 years, and the men, of course, for 3. Women were not allowed into combat until very recently, and that was a huge issue. The women were actually asking to.
It's a good idea, I think.
Well, it's all about citizenship, isn't it? Yeah.
I wanted to return to this Fatwa 64 and ask you about the language that they use for rape in Arabic or whatever language they are using. So do they just refer to us as intercourse? Do they have any, so when we say rape, we assume that it's going to be forced violence, no asking for consent type of, do they have it in the text? But also, this sounds like it's qualitatively different from mass rape that we see. And in other instances, for instance, the Bosnian rape camps in Foča, other places, or the Rwandan genocide conditions, where you don't regulate rape the way you regulate this. It of course, it's a state decree. I understand that. But even then, I don't quite understand how this is different from how Islam regulates slavery in general. Because even with the fact that people can have, Muslims can have enslaved non-Muslims that are not Dilma, and that they have rights, sexual rights over there.
As long as they're married, right? Because you would have to be married to your slave. She would become a concubine, and then you could do, I guess, what you wanted. But
Concubine would not be considered as your wife. Wife is different from concubine.
well, they have milk al-yamin, right? It's what your right hand possesses, and I mean, here obviously there's no question of marriage.
Slavery documents, right? It's a document.
No, it's war captives. In Arabic, it's sabaya.
So prisoner of war.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so it's open season on women. They're not slaves. It looks like, you see, the language, it looks like it. I mean, it feels Sharia-like. Forbidden to you are, permitted to you are, be kind.
Intercourse or rape, or what's the language about having sexual relations?
Jamais. Coming together. Yes, so, yeah. Okay, thank you very much.